I guess it's good afternoon, everybody. I'm standing between you and your lunch, so a lot of pressure. I'll try and be quick. I think a lot's been said already, and I don't want to, I'll try not to repeat too much. Thanks also for inviting us. I think it's a really good initiative. Italy, the Italian ITA is doing this initiative. Other countries do the same. And we're happy to participate. So one interest for us in let's say, promoting what the banks finance and everything is also to ensure there's also interest from companies, also for the contracting. I mean, the procurement of works that we finance, we like to see good competition, good participation from strong companies. So that's, let's say, what's in it for us to be here today. Anyway, let me move on. Yeah, I guess many of you were here earlier and may have heard Alessandro's presentation about introduction about the EIB. Basically, EIB Group has the EIB and EIF, the fund, which fund is more, let's say, finances more SMEs and funds, and the EIB, let's say, the EIB itself, the bank, is the traditional lending arm, let's say, private sector, public sector, both of them, and that's where I sit. Very in a nutshell, it's the EU bank, so it's owned by the EU member states, established in '58, Treaty of Rome actually, so in this country. So it's not too big compared to some of our, well, compared to World Bank certainly, but it's a very big it's very big in terms of lending. It does 87 billion that was last year of loans, of which, however, the majority is inside the EU. So it's easy to get a high number like that. Another thing also for us, the climate is top of the agenda at the moment. We have a climate bank roadmap, which we rolled out last year. And now basically we want to do 50% of our lending in climate. Now there's no internationally agreed definition of what that is, climate, but okay. We're doing what we can. And like Alessandro said this morning, we're not financing anything with fossil fuels anymore, so even gas. So for all the rush that there is to get gas inside the EU, as the EIB, we're not financing it. So we're trying to move people to renewable energy. But that's this morning's topic. Okay, this is a bit of breakdown of the different areas that we're lending in. I will skip it. Again, the same slide as before. 87 billion in total, and 10% so inside the EU, and 10% of that is outside the EU, distributed over these areas. I've been asked to speak a little bit about the neighborhood countries, so, but I'll come back to those. So here you have the breakdown of the regions, including some of the neighborhood. I consider Eastern neighborhood and Southern neighborhood and enlargement countries as the neighborhood, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. Just again, a summary of last year. How many people we reached in the water sector, but I'll show you some more figures in a minute. I guess for water, you say 10 million people are benefiting from the contracts that we signed last year. Obviously, we follow all the metrics on this and produce these figures. Here's a little bit a snapshot of the ranking of beneficiaries inside the EU on the bottom of the bar chart. And it's nice to point out that Italy is the first beneficiary. And I put some sample projects. These are all big utilities. Well, the top ones are the big utilities, then some smaller ones as well, and some also in cohesion areas like in Sardinia or the south. So these are all typical beneficiaries of the EIB. That's the bread and butter, let's say, financially for the bank, even if it's a not-for-profit organization. United Kingdom is still there amongst the EU, amongst that list of, let's say, European countries. Obviously, it's not a member state anymore, so it used to be by far the number one because of the way that the industry is regulated. It lends itself very well for large loans. So it used to be number one. Obviously, now that's stopped because it's not an EU member state anymore. So it'll go down in the next years. It'll disappear from this list gradually. Yeah, and lately we had a few big signatures in Germany. So it's between Italy and Germany. They're also two of the three largest shareholders of the EIB. They each have 15%. So, and obviously the largest population. So these are the countries where we're lending the most. Now, rushing a little bit into the neighborhood areas. I don't have all the countries in the neighborhood, but I have the Mediterranean region and the candidate countries, so mainly the Western Balkans. So you see that the Mediterranean area is a very big beneficiary for us. This is the water sector figures, so 1.5 billion in the last 6 years. And the biggest beneficiaries are, well, obviously Egypt, which has the largest population by far of any of these countries. And our investments in this area have been very much in wastewater treatment facilities. That's really getting a huge boost, obviously with the ability or the possibility to reuse properly treated wastewater. It's a real opportunity also to use that water for irrigation or other purposes and substitute them using or other sources, let's say pristine water sources for those purposes. Another large beneficiary is Jordan. We've had 2 very huge projects there, project finance, which I'll mention in a second as well. So that's just a bit of a coincidence that it's so bulky, but it's also reflective of a very well-organized country. I mean, I think the institutional setting, the governance in the country is quite good in this area. And obviously, I think it's the second most water-scarce country in the world. So they obviously need large investments in this area as well. I'll come back to that in a second. And then in these candidate countries, the Balkans, it's completely different. It's completely fragmented. You have the odd large project, like Skopje wastewater treatment plant, which is a big one, a 200 million investment. That's coming soon. But then the majority are a very fragmented small project in many towns. And that's another project I will mention in a second at the end. There's a little bit the variability over time. You see the orange on the left is the UK, that's now ending. And you see blue is EU. So you see that we have a very high percentage outside EU in the water sector. It's much higher than the 10% that the bank does on average. So I think it has a very big, let's say, developmental impact. It's obviously a human right and all those kinds of things. So. And the countries are very much in need of these investments. So a lot of work for us, a completely different approach in terms of our lending inside EU and outside EU. Because outside EU, inside EU, there's a presumption of legality, that everything they do on procurement, environment, social, the design of that, everything is fine. They have to follow EU directives, so we don't have to monitor as closely. It's a bit like a commercial bank in that sense. Whereas outside EU, we have all the usual safeguards that most development banks or multilateral, even bilateral ones have. Well, for example, we have the guide to procurement, the environmental and social standards to monitor all these things. And this means a lot of work for us, but also for the borrowers to prepare projects, for us to follow them. But this, let's say, as a reassurance for potential investors or companies that are interested to operate in these areas, in particular the one on procurement, the fact that they follow international procurement sort of standards is a reassurance that they have a level playing field, that they will not be disadvantaged in any way, besides that they might not have local references or that, but otherwise it's a level playing field, and projects financed by the likes of an EIB or all the other banks that have spoken before me, is that these projects are, you're not going to waste your time in terms of bad procurement practices or anything like that. So that's a really important message that I wanted to bring here. I just want to point out this taxonomy point, because in the EU they're developing a taxonomy on sustainable finance, and this is going to inform all public funding support from the Commission, like what would be eligible for a lot of the grants that they will be providing. So we benefit a lot from, or our beneficiaries benefit a lot from EU grants, where us or EBRD or our other colleagues can apply to the EU for these funds, but projects will in the future have to be taxonomy compliant in many cases. So this is in the water sector, this will affect desalination, for example. I'll come back to that in a second. And then finally, like I said, we were established by the Treaty of Rome. It's an EU story, But why are we working outside? Well, we get specific mandates from the Commission. So the Commission asks us, besides your mandate, your statutes, which says you have to work in the EU, please can you also do something outside the EU? And we receive guarantees, basically cover for our lending outside the EU for that. And that's why we act outside the EU as well. And of course, policy, so it's very much to support all kinds of EU policies. They're listed here. You see there's a focus in North Africa and in the neighborhood area, but I won't spend much time there. Coming back to desalination, well, obviously everybody knows it's very high energy intensive technology. We've been financing these for the last 15 years, starting in, well, also inside the EU, but outside the EU, Israel is one of the biggest beneficiaries. We finance 5 enormous desalination plants. And under the taxonomy, basically it's not yet been finally adopted, but there's been no objection to it. They're going to say that they're going to set a certain target, an emissions target on what level of emissions is acceptable for producing a cubic meter of water, and that's 1,080 grams of CO2 equivalent per cubic meter. That means that in highly efficient facilities, so desalination facilities, and where you have green electricity networks, let's say, or very fairly clean, then you would meet this threshold. So even desalination can be supported and actually considered sustainable finance, which, you know, in some environmentalist people's minds, they would say, how can that be? Desalination is so energy intensive. And in fact, in this project in Jordan, this is one that's out for tender right now. The tender's ongoing actually for the works. This is a very large project. It's, well, we'll have to see when the bids come in what the final price is, but the estimates are around $2.7 billion. It's basically desalination at Aqaba and a conveyor all the way to the capital, Amman. And, well, this is a project where actually there's more energy required to pump the water than there is to desalinate it, because it's so far and there's a 1,000-meter elevation gain. So we've set a standard. This is one of the areas where we've contributed as EIB to set the emission standards such that the bidders will be forced to propose also renewable energy solutions. So this is obviously project finance. Well, there are 2 loans. One is a sovereign loan, and one loan is for the contractors. And the sovereign loan will go to subsidize to keep the tariffs low of the contract of the contractors. And then just to finalize this other operation, this is just one example. This is in North Macedonia, where basically we're looking at a lot of small villages. I mean, this is 80 municipalities in the country. Every municipality you know, is eligible to receive some investments for upgrading their very tiny systems. It's obviously very small, and for the limited resources that we have in terms of staff, like I mentioned, which is 3,500, there's only 20 water people. Actually, much. I don't know how you do it, David, all alone, but you must have an army of consultants. But in our case, we follow these as well, also with consultants, and we have to develop a system through which, you know, we can delegate a lot of the work for the preparation of projects and the whole procurement procedures, where we look ex post rather than ex ante, whether all the procurement steps are done properly. So these are a little bit, this is a framework loan, the previous one was an investment loan. A framework loan, everything is checked ex post. So obviously you do an appraisal at the start, but a lot of the things are checked ex post. So these are 2 different styles through which we operate. Like Alessandro said this morning, usually they're very large loans. We, let's say, the smaller investments and all that usually go through loans from us to commercial banks who would then on-lend, but then it wouldn't have the EIB label and the visibility on it either. So I think that's it. I would like to echo, I can't remember who said it. I think it was one of the first speakers from the World Bank, I think it was you that mentioned, you know, he had a recommendation for let's say, bidders for works, you know, funded by the likes of ourselves. Indeed, I think the local presence, understanding your market, those things are absolutely true. references, having the right references, so knowing yourself and how you compare with your competitors. These are very, very important aspects. And I think there's another one that I forgot, but I mean, I can only repeat what you said, which doesn't really add much value, but I just want to emphasize that what you were saying, I fully agree. And this is, I think, important for the intended audience today, even if half have left. Okay, well, this is a project in Africa. I won't talk about this one. I'll conclude here and let everybody off to lunch. And happy to speak with anybody that wants to approach me after, or otherwise tomorrow for the one-to-ones. I'll be there. So
yes, thanks. Thanks a lot.